So we are live. I'm going to try and make you guys a little bit bigger. Yeah, there we go. So that I'm not just the one taking up the whole screen. This is the second Q&A live session that's answering startup questions from all over the world. We are Sarah, Kirk and Celia from LeapSheep, and we are super excited to answer a whole bunch of startup questions that have come through to us today on TikTok. Also a couple from LinkedIn, and maybe we might mention a couple that we've gotten from people that we have been serving during the week with their more in-depth case studies. Just want to say a big thank you to the Startup Council as well for letting everyone know that we're doing these live sessions on Fridays. I'd never actually heard of the Startup Council before, but I thought that they sounded a little bit something like, Ministry of Magic, Ministry of Startups. From Harry Potter or something. Super excited to dive in today. Kirk and Sarah, I'm just going to start us off right away with our first question that did come from TikTok. And that question is, I thought the difference between a successful startup and one that fails is largely a question of luck. And that is what a lot of people think. And that is a huge part of the 95% startup failure rate that we are dealing with right now. So Kirk, I'll throw to you first. What would you say to people who believe that startup success is largely down to luck? And how do we flip that narrative?
Yeah, such a great question. Look, there's no doubt the luck plays a huge part, and particularly so many stories that we read in the media where people seem to have these lucky breaks. I think the mindset that you need if you're going to build a startup is you've got to be in it for the long haul, and you really have to make your own luck by being in the business of building your company, being out there talking to potential customers, building your team, understanding what the customers need, building the right kind of solution concepts. And it's through that process. It's these lots and lots of little things that you do that essentially create your own luck. So I'll give you a really simple example. Just starting a LinkedIn content feed where you're producing content targeted at your audience, you're going to have some luck because people are going to listen to what you say, and if they're interested in what you say, they're going to reach out to you. And those people could be, great customers, and they might not be good customers, but it's through all these actions that you take as a startup founder that you essentially create your own luck, and you just need to keep that momentum going so you can get enough luck to be successful.
Yeah. What would you say, Sarah, to people who think startup building is about luck?
I completely agree with what Kirk said there. I mean, you do get some instances. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, I think, is a great example of that, kind of luck. He just so happened to have a great product idea at the great time. And luck will come into it for a lucky few people. Like sometimes you can just accidentally stumble on something, but I'd say 99% of the time, that's not the case. You, as Kirk said, you create your own luck.
Yeah, that's right. And, I think what's so important is building a startup is like anything else in life, right? It's you get a set of cards in a way. You get dealt a deck of cards, right? And that deck of cards is made up of what you want to build. How receptive your potential customers might be to what you want to build. How difficult it might be to disrupt the industry that you're in. All of these different kind of factors make up your deck of cards, right? But then it all comes down to how you play it, right? And the whole point of LeapSheep existing is that we help you build a go-to-market strategy that reduces the reliance on luck as far as possible. Timing's always there'll be some point or maybe many points in your business journey where something happens and it's like, oh gosh, like November 2022, great example, right? When ChatGPT got released, right? That had so many implications on so many businesses, and so many businesses have benefited or not benefited from luck as a result of that. But if you have a proper go-to-market strategy that is designed to take you from idea to product market fit in the most capital efficient way possible, then you're reducing your reliance on luck and, also setting yourself up for being lucky when, some sort of market anomaly strikes.
It's worth saying that I think the luck equation is changing dramatically in the startup space. It's a bit like the medical industry 400 years ago. you were lucky if you got gangrene on your leg and you survived that, right? The medical industry, might saw off your leg. They might do a bunch of, weird and wonderful things to you, and maybe they worked and maybe they didn't. And, luck played a huge part in that because there was no process and there was no real understanding for how to solve the problem. And this is what's changing in the startup world now. 15, 20 years ago, we didn't really understand the science of building startups. And now we're understanding that, and that's why we exist, is to curate all that great knowledge and create a system and scale the ability to get that into the hands of founders. And so luck is playing a less and less part. We want to be able to create predictability for founders.
Yeah, that's right. And it's great that you use the word science there, because, there is a way of, reverse engineering product market fit. And it's, it starts with avoiding all of those big rookie errors, like diving straight in and building a product as soon as you've got an idea and not validating it with the market. Just so many different rookie errors like that along the way that people just make over and over and over again. And it just needs to become common knowledge that it's not going to serve you to do that. To actually approach this with a roadmap and a strategy that's going to be the connective tissue between all the different activities that you do to build your startup. We have a caller. We have somebody joining us right now. RF, there's no camera though. So RF, if you are there and if you could turn on your camera, that would be amazing. If you can't turn on your camera, that's fine. Just say hello so we know you're there. Otherwise, we'll go to another one of the pre-asked questions. Okay, it looks like they're not there. No problem. Let's go to the next question that came to us on TikTok. Oh, this is actually, Kirk, this one's a great challenge for you. This one definitely goes to you first. This is a bit of a sort of like situational tactical question, but the asker says, I was asked by an investor to provide the LTV, cost of acquisition, etc. And he said that he only invests in pre-seed and seed, but how do I get these metrics at this early stage, right?
Yeah, great question. So and the problem with pre-seed and seed is they're kind of loose definitions. If you're pre-seed, you certainly should be pre-product and pre-revenue. So at that point, you're going to be really having a hypothesis for what your business model could be.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to build that hypothesis based on data that you can find from other startups. So if you can find similar startups, and there's lots of data that you can search around and find on the internet for the typical kinds of acquisition costs that maybe other startups have, or the other kind of marketing and sales approach that you want to take. So, for example, if you want to take a direct selling approach and hire a sales force, there will be costs associated with that. If you want to have inside sales and do sort of telesales, Zoom calls, that kind of thing, or if you want a pure digital marketing funnel, no touch, people just put the credit card in. There's information about all those kinds of things available in terms of what the average customer acquisition costs. Now, every business is going to be unique, and that's why you have to experiment and you have to iterate to figure out if you can validate that assumption. And the same is true with LTV and your average contract value or your annual contract value, depending on your business model, whether you've got a transaction or you've got a recurring business model. Figuring that out, you're going to have to make some assumptions on what you think you can do, and you want to validate those, or you want to back up those assumptions or base those assumptions on similar kinds of companies. But remember that they are just assumptions, and they have to be validated or they have to be falsified. I like this approach, this mindset where it's not necessarily about validating your assumptions, because we all want our assumptions to be validated. We desperately want our assumptions about our startup to be validated. You actually want to create the mindset of trying to falsify your assumptions. You actively want to look to be wrong to make sure that you're not over-investing in things.
Yeah, cool. And, maybe Sarah, you could sort of point out a couple of things that we do at stage A of our disruptive innovation journey that help people with this, because we do want to start talking to investors as soon as possible, not necessarily for, asking for money, but just creating relationships. And of course, they're going to be wanting to know, well, what are the possibilities here? What might this business model look like? And of course, we don't know that when we haven't started the startup yet, and we've really got no idea what's coming. But we have to be able to make a hypothesis, right? So maybe you could just share a couple of things we do at stage A to help people make that hypothesis.
Sure. So typically at stage A, which is all around vision, we call it vision market fit, and it's all around have you got a big enough vision with the market trends, not too many competitors, everything around that means that there's an opportunity worth pursuing, so it's worth you going after and spending the time that it takes to build a startup. Back to this particular point about the metrics, and just kind of taking Kirk's guidance and turning it into some practical steps. So one of the best things to do is look at comparator companies in other industries. So what kind of business model may you be going for that is already a successful unicorn in another industry, and looking at their metrics, particularly that lifetime value, cost of customer acquisition, the annual contract value, sales cycle time is another good one, and then looking at what is possible with a business model that is like yours but in a completely different industry. Identifying those metrics, and then at the very beginning, as you start to talk to potential customers, you're going to have very high costs of customer acquisition because most likely you'll be having conversations. And so record those, document them, and then of course you can show your progress over time as you start to get better at sales, find repeatable sales channels, and then you can show your progress towards those ideal metrics. And it's a really great way of communicating that you know where you're headed and that you're making progress to get there.
Amazing.
I think some of the key is having a robust defense to those assumptions as well. So, for example, if you're planning to build like a line of business system, a B2B, if you're a B2B SaaS company building a line of business system, we know that businesses don't change those systems very frequently. So 5 to 10 years is a very typical time frame for someone to keep an ERP system, for example. So that helps you figure out, if what your lifetime value is. On the other hand, if you've got some communication software or some graphic design software that you're building, the ease with which people can change those kinds of solutions is much easier, and therefore the LTV can often be shorter. So as long as you can defend your assumptions, that's really important.
Yeah, that's great. Really good. All right, the next question, I don't know, I think someone might have been trolling me with this next question, but it's still worth asking. It's still worth answering. And that is, what is your opinion on build it and they will come? Kirk.
Oh my God, how do I not have an emotional reaction to this?
How do I not get triggered by this question? And this is not, if that was a serious question, we're not making fun of you, but I've got a feeling it might have been a trolling question, but it's still a good question to ask.
Yeah, don't do it. Don't do it. I mean, the startup graveyard is just littered with people that that have tried this approach. We know that it's the number one cause of startup failure. There's been lots of different studies to show that this is the case. You really have to validate that there is a market opportunity worth pursuing. It is just so risky to build a product or a solution or a technology, or even push yourself. I mean, you see this with a lot of deep tech startups. They have a desire to want to solve for the supply side of their idea and push themselves up their TRL level and invest in making that happen before they've even validated that there's a market there that's worth going after. And the best possible thing you can do for your startup is go and validate that market exists before you spend too much money on the supply side. You're far better off to be in the position of having demand that you can't supply and having to let down your customers. And if you do that in a very well-managed way, you can make sure that you don't let down your customers and you retain your reputation and you manage that downside risk. You're much better off to be in that position than have invested a whole bunch of money in a solution that no one wants. You just never get any return on that investment.
Yeah, that's it. Sarah, what do you say to people that say, "Oh, well, I'm just going to build an app. I'm just going to build an app and put it in the App Store and see what happens"?
This kind of build it and they will come is rife in startup ecosystems. Like, it's continually getting coverage, and it's because of a misunderstanding of Eric Ries's concept of the first minimum viable product, and the Kirk mentioned the pre-revenue validation stage, and really what that is you typically start with an idea, whether that's an idea of your product or an idea of the problem. There's clear steps to do that market validation so that you don't end up in this mess, and those are identify the market segment, the very specific niche beachhead segment where you think that the problem is most impactful and kind of painful. We call it a pants on fire problem. Go out, speak to those people in that market, ask them about what they're trying to achieve, what some of the challenges that they're facing are, and particularly what are their activities or jobs to be done, like what are they doing, so you can understand how your solution idea might fit for them. And of course, in doing that, they're also getting an opportunity to talk about the challenges that they're facing. And when you can go back to them and say, look, we've done all this research, you're not alone. There's people who are having these specific problems, and we think that we could solve those or help you overcome those problems with a solution that looks like this. And then you can test that solution with them, like show it to them, make it scrappy, get them thinking about it, thinking about how they would use it, talking about it. And at the end of it, is this something that you would pay when it's ready? And if it is, fabulous. You will be building something that people will come for because you have done that work for. And it is a step that if you skip it, you will be going back to it in almost like 99.9% of cases.
I think the other problem here is there is a belief that data can get you out of this by building a product and putting it out there and collecting data. Or you hear this advice all the time given to founders, like just run a Facebook ad campaign or run a Google ad campaign and see what the response is to your idea. And on the surface, that sounds really, really clever. It's like, well, that's going to collect me real data on whether customers on or not. But when you actually start to unpack that and figure out what you're doing, like imagine you're creating a new kind of CRM system. I don't know, you've decided there's a gap in the market for CRM systems for dog walkers. I don't know, whatever it happens to be, right? And so there are people online searching for CRM systems, and so you go and buy some keywords, and what you're going to do is find people that are looking for solutions that they already know exist. You're building a solution that nobody knows that it exists, or what its unique value proposition is, or what unique problems it solves. So you're going to end up capturing this group of people that you don't really understand very well. They don't understand you very well, and you're then going to try and interpret that data. What you need in the early stage of startups is you don't need that quantitative data so much as qualitative data. You need to understand the why, what's causing people to make decisions, and that is manual, and it's slow, and it's time consuming, and it involves not a lot of technology. Sometimes it's just humans talking to humans, but it is the very best way that you can understand cause and effect, and you can understand triggers, and you can understand why people have problems and the context, and all those things matter to figure out what quality means to build a product. If you want to get to product market fit, you have to understand what quality means. To understand what quality means, you have to understand your customers. And if you want to do that through data, it's going to be slow and expensive.
Slow and expensive. And if you just think about it, like I was never very good at science at school, but I do remember being taught how to do experiments and having control groups and understanding all the different factors that can influence an experiment and that can invalidate it, and I learned like how often an experiment it failed or it was invalidated because you messed up a part of the system to test it properly, right? And that's exactly the same when it comes to Facebook ads. It's like I've met so many founders who do this. They'll get on a call with me and they'll say, yes, I've been running Facebook ads just to test if X. It's like, but X under what conditions? And where are these people coming from? And do you know why they've responded to the ad? Was it your hook line? Was it your messaging? And does your messaging match the offer? We just don't know there are so many stages along the path of seeing a Facebook ad, answering a Facebook ad, or any type of ad, and the sequence of events that goes along to either bouncing from a landing page or bouncing from a website or bouncing from a squeeze page or signing up. Like we don't know why any of these happen, right? And so that's why it's a terrible idea to run paid ads in the beginning, because you don't know what you're basing anything off of. And then, then the question is, well, Celia, how do I know what to base things off of? Like, how do I create a procedure here? And so I want to show the disruptive innovation journey diagram. Kirk, is it all right if I show the version with the white background?
Yeah, go for it.
Is that okay? Last week we showed the version with the grey background, which is equally helpful, however harder to see. So this is the version with the white background, and as you can see here, like this whenever someone asks, well, guys, like what is the system here? Like, how do we know that this stuff, like that we can create a system around this? And we always revert to this diagram here, the disruptive innovation journey. This is a moving beast in itself, this diagram, but essentially, we've got right here, you can see at 0, there's company backbone, and at E, there is product market fit. So we always have to be thinking about our journey from idea to product market fit, and what happens on the way in between. And, paid advertising, honestly, like sometimes it might feature on this journey, but really often it may not even feature on this journey. It is, yeah, go ahead.
That what you mentioned here is such an important point, because the diagnostics that you need to perform on an individual company and an individual idea to decide what to do is really where the deep IP is in this sort of system process. So, for example, if you're in an established market and you're not really innovating, you want to create a copy of a proven business model for which there is already a proven market and there's already proven demand and market share, then yes, that could be a great option. Doing paid ads. You're not innovating a new market. You're not trying to build a new market. And this is why Steve Blank talked about market type. But it's understanding when to apply the advice and guidance. And I think this is the challenge in the startup ecosystem more broadly. Is there's so many best practices that have been proven to work, and you can show a number of startups that have successfully used these approaches. The challenge is knowing which approach to use at which time in a given startup. And if you don't have a system and a set of diagnostics to figure that out, it can be really, really challenging, and you can waste a lot of time and a lot of money doing the wrong thing for your startup.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're building a startup, you're disrupting an industry, right? And you're disrupting a space because you're creating something that's never been created before. And that means that you do need to build a brand new type of business model to support that brand new type of solution. So yeah, just like Kirk was explaining, you're not opening an accounting firm. We all know what an accountant is, and an accountant business is, the business model is pretty well established, pretty easy to understand, pretty easy to copy, cookie cutter, and follow. But that's not the case when you're building an app, right? Or you're building a piece of software, or you're building a piece of tech that's completely new and nobody's ever seen it before. And this is why we need to do all of these steps along the way, especially the pre-revenue market validation, which is stage A, vision market fit, that's your market research. Stage B, problem market fit, that's your user research. And then what happens in those two stages leads into your answers about what you do in stage C, which is concept market fit. That's solution. That's developing your solution concept. That's the moment where, people might, people throw around the term MVP all the time in the startup world. But a lot of people dive in and build. They have an idea and build an MVP, right? And, it's a terrible thing to do, because your idea of what your MVP should be might be very, very different from the people who would give you money.
That's right. Yeah. You just shift the problem from building the wrong product to building the wrong MVP.
Exactly. Yeah. You build the wrong MVP, which leads to building the wrong product, which leads to going to market in the wrong way, which leads to, failure, essentially.
Yeah.
Years of your time wasted and heaps of your money wasted.
The other thing about this build it and they will come kind of myth that exists is, we often talk so much about the technology side of startups and the fact that, new technologies coming down the pipe like AI or spatial computing creates opportunities for startups. We don't often talk as much about the distribution and demand generation side of building startups and how that ecosystem is constantly evolving just the same way technology is evolving. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if we were back in 2010, 2011, 2012, that kind of time frame when, for example, the App Store on the iPhone was still really nascent and there wasn't as many apps as there is now, that it's a very mature ecosystem that's very, very difficult to get any sort of cut through and exposure, it might make sense to run certain types of tests on those kind of early stage platforms if you can get in early enough But once those platforms become saturated like they are now, it's just not an option. And so you really need to understand the landscape of both the technology and the distribution channel, the right strategy for your particular startup using the framework that we've just described.
Yeah, that's right. So that sort of actually leads into the next question pretty nicely, which is, where is a good place to go to learn how to create or write a quality go-to-market strategy? So, of course, our temptation is to say, come to us, but what other advice could we give on this question? Because it's a great question.
It's such a good question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a hard one to answer because we're at one of those inflection points, I think, in the media consumption ecosystem, and so things are changing. The sands are shifting at the moment, and so people that have had very successful businesses to build go-to-market strategies, say in the last 5 years, those businesses are starting to break down. We can sort of see that in real time now, where there's so much of the mainstream business world has now shifted online over the past 10 years or so. That's pushing the price of keywords up across the different platforms like Google and Facebook, and you can see, you don't have to go online to look at the charts and graphs about that, and you probably experience that if you're involved in this in your own businesses. As a consequence, we're seeing people have to shift their go-to-market strategies, and you have to really understand strategy. You can no longer just follow a tactic that you find online that's proven to work. You have to understand why the tactic works in the first place. And so that's why it's hard to answer this question, because you've got to follow people that really, really understand the why behind the go-to-market strategy. And there's a couple of great case studies that we like to talk about, like Tesla, for example, where what Elon Musk helped do with building Tesla is understanding, well, the first best segment to go into was that two-door sports car segment, selling a high price status symbol and toy to make people feel good, people with lots of disposable income. It wasn't a functional car, and so it was an easier to build car. It was a less price sensitive market, and so that was a great first beachhead to go into. Now, it was never ever going to deliver the revenue and profit needed to sustain Tesla as a company and provide a return on investment to the investors, but it was a great first market to get fans and advocates and build momentum, build production capability, and then use that as a stepping stone to the next market. So you can see these strategies, and unfortunately, a lot of the real successful startup stories that we hear, those strategies weren't necessarily designed. Now, I think in Tesla's case, I think it was designed. Elon published that Tesla strategy before he executed it. It's a bit like playing snooker or pool. When someone says, "I'm going to put that ball in that pocket."
Yeah.
You want the people that can do that, follow them and look at them, as opposed to the people who said, "Look, I got it in."
Exactly.
Where it was a bit of luck, right?
Yeah, that's right. That is a great document. If you ever Google that, I can't remember what the document's called, but if you just Google, Elon Musk Tesla strategy or something, it will come up. It is a great document to describe how, like, a really, really solid, logical way to go to market, even though, if you're not aware of the counterintuitive tricks that come along with startup building, you might read that. If Tesla didn't exist, you might read that and be like, what the hell, but it makes perfect sense, right? If you do understand these counterintuitive tricks that are involved in startup building. I'm just going to have one more go at sharing this, and actually I'm going to put it on full screen. So can you guys, I'm not going to be able to see you guys from the inside here, so if you can just yell at me if things aren't working, that would be awesome. So just tell me if this isn't going properly. Yeah. So I want to have a really good stab at actually explaining this properly, because until we can do that, and we just need to do it over and over again, people are going to be like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, yeah, we know we've got to do this, we've got to do that, we've got to do that. But the question always comes back to, what order do we do things in, and why? And like, why do we go about things in the way that we go about them? So, whenever a startup founder comes and has an initial chat with us, this is one of the first diagrams that we show them. And it's called the disruptive innovation journey. And what it represents is a go-to-market strategy and how to build your go-to-market strategy. It's how to build your go-to-market strategy, because your go-to-market strategy is going to look completely different from everyone else's, because you're building a product that is completely different from everyone else's and solving problems that haven't been solved in this way before. So you can see that there's 4 stages here. You've got your pre-revenue market validation stage, you've got your initial pilot validation stage, you've got your product market fit validation stage, and you've got your scale-up stage. Obviously, every single milestone on this diagram is important, but the first most important ones are the first ones, which is the pre-revenue market validation stage, right? So, we've got company backbone here. So we start here with our idea, but we always come back to the company backbone. You can see these backwards arrows here. We always come back to the company backbone to make sure that we're not over-investing or under-investing in everything, because the whole point of a go-to-market strategy is to go to market in the most capital-efficient way possible. So we don't want to be over-investing in CRMs that we don't need, in marketing agency work that we don't need, in paid advertising stuff that we don't need, software stuff that we don't need. But also we don't want to be under-invested where we actually do need to be invested either. So we actually check that as we come back after each stage, right?
That's really worth restating that. The game of building a startup is as much about capital efficiency as anything else.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in the last sort of decade, as capital has become easier and easier and easier, before the squeeze happened, we saw just a lot of really bad behavior around company spend from even the top firms in Silicon Valley, and successful startups that have had exits. If you look at the unicorn production in 2013 versus 2023, capital efficiency has fallen off a cliff. And it's because people have used resources and money to solve problems instead of innovation. And people always say this, that if you're resource constrained, you have to innovate, and that's true. And that's the whole point of building a startup, is you're trying to build an innovation that allows you to use technology as leverage instead of labor and capital.
Exactly.
So it's so important.
That's right. This disruptive innovation journey is an innovation risk management framework. It's an innovation risk management framework, and it's a framework that you can use to build the go-to-market strategy that will take you to product market fit. And go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's really important to understand when we say go-to-market strategy, what we mean, because I don't want anyone to mistake that for thinking it's about just marketing.
Yeah.
And it's really important that the goal of building a startup is obviously to build a successful business model. And there are sort of 3 major components that you need to get working. You've got to have a solution that can reliably create fans and advocates. You've got to have a way to acquire those fans that's scalable and cost effective. And you've got to have all the company infrastructure to do the things that you need, like run DevOps pipelines and run employee performance reviews and blah blah blah. And so it's not enough just to focus on one of those. For example, thinking, well, I can just build a great product, and if I just have a great roadmap for a solution and the technology behind that, we're going to be successful. And it's not enough just to have a great marketing strategy, where you think it's just all about, how can I get brilliant branding and great exposure and great influencers and blah blah blah. You have to combine all those 3 things together into what we like to use the term company roadmap instead of product roadmap, because you're building an entire company. And this process that you're talking about is about building the company, and it's about being capital efficient across all those 3 streams and making decisions together.
Yeah, exactly. And so, can you guys see my mouse when I'm moving it, or is that not?
I can't. No, I can't.
You can't see it. That's so annoying. I need to learn how to use this better. It'd be so great if I had a pointer right now. But, like the big problem that I'll just try to point out here is, see where it says initial pilot validation, or like that spot between concept market fit and pilot market fit. That is where, I wonder if this, oh no, yes, pen. Here. Oh, I'm going to put marks all over this now. But that's probably a pretty good mark to put on this diagram, because that is typically where people dive in. They dive in somewhere between I'm going to make an MVP and I'm going to build a product because I've got a great idea, right? And that's where they start. So that for them, that's where the start of this journey is. So that means they don't take any time to consider how am I going to do this in a capital efficient way? What am I going to need at what stage and what am I not going to need? They don't take any time to do any market research to make sure that they've got a globally scalable opportunity and to actually set themselves up with a proper market research report and a proper initial pitch deck so that they can actually talk to both investors and like their first possible early adopter customers and actually talk to them about the idea, right? Then it also means they haven't done any user research, and user research is really different from user engagement research, which comes in here, right? So, this is the fault of the industry and the terms that are used as well. But, user research you do before you've even developed a solution concept, or at least before you've shown anybody a solution concept. And we do our user research here in a really, really careful 6-part framework. That's the user research part. And it's a really, really careful 6-part framework to make sure that you do not accidentally plant bias in your user research candidates' heads about what you're trying to build. Because as soon as you say, we want to build this, humans being people-pleasing humans will say, oh, okay, sounds like a great idea. So let's move in that direction with this conversation, right? And then we steer them away from them possibly telling us about their big pants on fire problems in their daily life at work or at home or wherever the problem space is that we're looking to try and solve. And then we miss out on that golden opportunity to get that information from them. Because I honestly, I don't know if we've ever worked with any startup before where when they finish their user research, they are still going to build the same thing that they were going to build before going into the user research. I would say 100% of the time, people are surprised.
That is so true, and I think this particular topic of user research it exemplifies the challenge around building a startup. Because if you go onto Google and you go onto YouTube and you look up user research and you find people that are user research specialists, mostly what you're going to find is people and teams that are working for companies like Facebook, or they're working for Google, or they're working for Slack, or they're working for what are no longer startups. Companies that are way past that stage of figuring out what product to build and what market to be in.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, if you try and follow any of the best practice advice and guidance, it's just not a match for a startup who is trying to figure out what market should I go into and what product should I build so that I don't waste my money on the wrong thing. And so the kind of user research that we're talking about here is user research with people that are potential customers, often when and ideally when you don't even have a product. And the advice and guidance that you can find online around that is so hard to find. It's almost non-existent. And I think this was one of the reasons why startup building is so hard, is because actually this first stage of building a startup is such a black art. Such a black art.
There's an extra trick that I want to call out here as well, because I've seen this in LinkedIn posts from supposed startup experts. I've seen this from people that we're working with who've previously been in accelerator programs. And there's a really big difference between the markets that you'll be able to tackle over 10, 20 years, like multiple large global markets. Like if you start your user research tackling all of those potential markets, you're going to end up with so much noise that it's going to be completely impossible for you to nail what that first version is. And so before you start with that user research, you have to have a crystal clear hypothesis of exactly who your first ideal customer, your early adopters are, so that you're only doing user research with that niche. Because then you start to find patterns that are very, very specific and likely to be similar, so that you can design a product that meet the needs of that very, very specific niche. So yeah, you've mentioned many times like Canva. It's a fabulous example of this. She Melanie Perkins first designed Canva for the very specific needs of students and high school teachers creating yearbooks, like a once a year activity. But it was so painful for that very specific group that she built out the first MVP and the first product that then turned into Canva. And that is, it feels so counterintuitive to start so niche when you want to make such a big impact. But if you don't start niche, you end up in a complete mess. And we end up helping founders unpick this all of the time. So if you're in this position, please start with a niche.
Exactly, right. And so I've just brought up this diagram here that we can use to show the reason why Canva is a $40 billion unicorn today. I'm sure it wasn't an easy journey, but Melanie and Cliff, I think, is her co-founder. They followed some really, really, really smart startup building best practice. I think it was probably luck that they did that and circumstance that they did that because they were so young. Melanie was only 19 when she started Canva. So she probably hadn't had time to, go to business school or whatever, learn. And I don't think you learn this stuff in business school either. But here's what she got right, which most startup founders get wrong, right? So you can see over here in this parallel approach, this is what we would call like the wrong way of going about this, right? And that is because what people let's say if Melanie had tried to build Canva with the parallel approach, what she would have done is noticed, hey, people are crap at using Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop and all of the other really complicated graphic design programs that all of us someone tried to teach us in school how to use them and someone failed because we still can't use them, right? So very well identified problem. But if she had gone in and thought, I want to create a graphic design program that's super simple and easy for everyone to use and you don't have to learn complicated design programs. And let's say she tried to build the Canva that exists today that serves, small businesses, large corporations, people wanting to make invitations for their kids' parties, people wanting to, design XYZ, like all the things that we do on Canva now, right? If she had tried to build that out from the beginning like that, to serve that all of those different types of people and all those different types of needs, she would have failed unless she had zillions of dollars already and she could afford to not go about this with the process, right? But that's never the case. It's never the case in startup building. You never have just zillions of dollars to just whatever. You have to do it in a strategic, capital efficient way. And so what she did just out of necessity was the first beachhead that she went to market with, the very first, very, very niche that she went to market with was teachers inside schools whose job it was to design the school yearbook. And the first iteration of Canva was just a very, very simple drag and drop template where all teachers could say, okay, this is the information I want on this page. They could drag and drop it in, boom, there it is. It's all nicely laid out. And we can also share the email files within the app as well, so we don't have to be dealing with emails left, right and center, from people emailing photos in and that kind of thing. They can all submit it to this one platform. So that was the initial first beachhead market segment, and I'm not familiar with exactly how the rest of the journey went, but you can imagine because what she did was she let teachers use the software on the condition that they would print their yearbook with her printing press, which she set up in her mother's living room, which is genius. And I think in her first year, she had 16 schools agree to do that. And then it just snowballed from there. And, I don't know if you guys know what the next segment was that she sort of mastered, but you can imagine it could have been something like, businesses wanting to design white papers so that they could use them as lead magnets online, right? And she just carved up the market segment by segment by segment and mastered it piece by piece. Kirk, is there anything more sophisticated you want to add?
Yeah, I think the other thing that sort of comes to mind as we're having this conversation is the founders that are trying to undertake this journey and looking, they might be out there speaking to investors and looking at the journey of Melanie and quite rightly going, if I went to an investor and said, I want to build a high school yearbook building app that's for a customer base selling to schools. I mean, VCs know how hard it is to sell things to schools, right?
Yeah.
And it's a need that's only once a year. That's not a fundable business. And so this just goes to show you that the advice that's out there for founders is so often unhelpful about what it really takes to build a really successful business. You've got to have that vision for everything that Canva could be, and be able to pitch that long-term vision. This is what we can turn into, but we have to start somewhere. We have to get into a niche to create fans and advocates. And we so often in startup world talk about MVPs, but we don't talk about the market segment that MVP is targeted at in order for us to create fans and advocates.
Exactly.
And so that's what this process is all about, is about reverse engineering. What is it going to take you to get to product market fit, so you can get there one segment at a time and be unbelievably capital efficient and get there with a much, much higher chance of success.
That's right. So Melanie, 19-year-old Melanie, she did have this big overall global vision. She did have this big overall, hey, I want to dominate in this industry. I want to dominate in this market. But of course, like being a 19-year-old girl, and like none of us anyway, are going to be able to afford to jump straight in there then, right? So this is the benefit of having stage A here, where we do vision market fit, because this is where we do the market research and produce a market research report showing, hey, here's all the potential here with this idea. Of course, we can't build this idea from scratch because that would be ridiculously expensive and super inefficient. So this is my hypothesis about who I'm going to serve first with this software and how. And we're going to validate that, right? We're going to validate that with the user research, i.e. talk to a whole bunch of teachers and not tell them what we're trying to do, but just see if they have this problem. And while we're at it, see what other problems they complain about, right? And then we can develop, a solution concept. We can show them, even if it's just a video on a landing page saying, hey, teacher, if a software or a clickable prototype, totally appropriate in this case, like, hey, teacher, if this existed and you could just do X, Y, and Z to create your yearbook every year, how would you feel about this? Oh, unbelievable, right? And knowing all along, knowing we're going to be able to do this for everyone that has to design something in some situation, which is everyone, even someone that, like if you've got kids, you'll have to design a, birthday invitation at some point or whatever, and be like, how do I do this? Right. But so we know we're using one case study to get to product market fit first, because we know we've got a repeatable problem. It happens every year. And there are thousands of schools in Australia and in every other country, right? So we know we can exhaust this market with this, because we know this is going to be a massive problem for most schools. And guess what? Once we've done that, we'll be able to move into a new market segment. We'll be able to move into our next market segment, right? So that's the kind of that's what we have to, investors have to be able to understand that that's the approach, and founders have to be able to paint that approach for the investor so that they can understand it in their particular situation, right?
And let's face it, most investors want to invest after you've figured out
Of course.
the stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's just important to understand that that's just the reality.
Yes.
I see there's a question from George Tasic from Pyrobotics.
Oh, amazing. Where is it?
Just in the chat.
In the chat.
Yeah, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you can show that on the screen.
I can.
Yeah. Cool. Okay.
Isn't there yet? What if?
There it is.
What if you're the user/customer and you're building a company to solve your own problem? That sounds familiar. What bias or pitfalls do you see in that situation? Great question.
Yeah, totally. So we're completely in this boat. The number one thing to say, I think, on this particular point is that you don't represent your customer base. As someone who has the desire and the aspiration and the commitment and the tenacity and the pain threshold and everything else to decide to want to start a startup to solve a problem, you're not normal. That's the first thing to recognize. Is the excitement and the enthusiasm by which you're going to want to engage with your solution is just not going to be your average user. So it's really, really important to do this stage B that we've just talked about, this user research stage, where you really authentically listen to what customers are saying and not put any of your bias onto them. And that's really, really hard to do that. So one, not talking about your solution at all, and just like if you're targeting, I don't know, solving problems for accountants, you need to have a conversation which is really, really open ended and allow them to talk about what's actually on their mind. Now you've obviously got an idea of where you want to steer the conversation to talk about the solution set that you can and want to address, and you don't want to spend a huge amount of time talking about things that you can't solve, but you have to spend enough time listening to what people say to figure out if the thing that you do want to solve they actually care about. Because if you ask me, do I care about going to the gym and getting fitter, I'm going to say absolutely yes. It's a high priority for me. I want to do that. But right now with young kids, aging parents, startup team, like it's just not high enough on the priority list. I'm sort of sacrificing a bit of my health to get all these other things done. And so if you don't have that conversation first about what else is going on in your life and what is the most important priorities and where are you going to put your time and your attention, then you're going to end up with invalid research results.
Yeah, that's right. I would say over the past 5 years of building organic marketing strategies with businesses, both service-based businesses and product-based startups, I think I have observed that most of the time when someone starts a business, it's because they're trying to build a solution to a problem they've had in the past, like a younger version of themselves, or like perhaps they figured it out and they're so glad they figured it out. And they want to share, they want to spend the rest of their life sharing that with people because they're just so relieved that they figured it out. But then that's it's all well and good to say that, right? But then there's doing it. And then when you do that, you come up against all of the roadblocks that, not only that you might have had, but also the roadblocks that you didn't have. And that's what Kirk's talking about. Like people might have the same problem, but they have different, it's like the experiment thing, right? There are different factors influencing on their life, which make them more or less likely or willing to want to do what it takes to solve this problem, i.e. use your service or use your method, right? And that's the really big trick there. And so if you build an app or a product, or even a service based on the way that you would want to have had your problem solved when you had it, you will find that there are massive big shortfalls because you might not have been in a typical situation that people are in that have this problem. So you haven't factored in all of these other things that need to be factored in order for a large mass of other people to want to actually pay you for the solution. And so we see that. I saw that all the time in service-based businesses. It's like, I see why you've set up this service and I see why you've done it in this way, but can you see why you're having problems selling it? Because you're not taking, and it's okay. It's sort of okay in a service-based business situation because you can just kind of pivot and tweak the business. You can pivot and tweak the service until you get it right. And then, okay, wow, more people are buying this now that I'm doing this. And that's reflected in my marketing messaging, right? But when you're building a product, you often don't get the luxury of iterating that way. It really depends on the product. And, if you can base your product on a service first, great, but often you can't do that. And so what you have to do is you have to do as much pre-revenue market validation work as possible, i.e. talk to people in a really systematic way to work out, give you the best chance of building the right thing first up. And then that's much less work iterating when you get to, pilot market fit, when we're iterating on the product, much less work and then much less spend, of course, on developers and that kind of thing, tweaking and iterating on the product. So actually, go ahead.
I was going to say, and that's why the disruptive innovation journey that you showed is a really belt and braces kind of approach to this risk management, because you need lots of way of managing that risk. Mm-hmm. So doing the user research that we're talking about gives you some signal from the market as to what problems are important for them to solve, but it's not enough. That alone is not enough. You then have to do your concept, your MVP concept. and that's a little bit more time and effort to build than just having conversations doing user research. It gives you a high quality signal, but having done user research, you know where to focus. And then the next thing you need to do is your first MVP iteration, followed by your second and your third and your fourth. And what you're really looking for in those first MVP iterations is you're looking to observe behavior. And this is the whole point of that second phase, the initial pilots phase, is you're trying to figure out if people will actually behave the way that they say they behave, and you make the assumption that they won't. And this is another common failure mode in startups is if you do user research and you get lots of signals from the market saying yes, I'll absolutely, customers are telling you yes, I desperately need this and I want this and I'll pay for it, and they're saying all the right things, but then when you build it as they've requested, as your users have requested, they don't use it, and it's because their behavior is not mapping with what they think their behavior is. And so you have to go ahead and build your company in a risk managed way to assume that that's going to be true, because it's going to be true in the majority of cases, and often that's a totally a recoverable situation. But it's recoverable because you can change the way that you're presenting your product and your solution to account for those problems.
Exactly. And like one of the first, I'll say, when I started working with startups, which was a total accident initially, and the reason why is because I had, sort of like business owners come to me that were executing a service, but they had built, so they're software people, right? Software developers, consultants, IT consultants, that sort of thing. They had built apps to solve problems that their customers had, their clients had, when they were consulting for them. Oh, I can see you, big government organization, you've got this problem with X, right? I'm going to build an app that's going to solve the problem, and it did for that client. And then the big mistake then is that developer thinks, oh, look, it just solved it for this. All government organizations could use this. I'll just put it in the app store. And it's like you're making these big,
so common, right?
crazy assumptions that people are going to understand what you've done. How could they possibly understand your journey and what you've done? And then, so that's where marketing comes in, organic marketing, and that messaging piece. It's so important. And talking to people. Marketing does not mean sitting behind a screen and pressing some buttons and hoping other people press buttons and buy your thing. Marketing is really, it's getting out and talking to people and making sure, am I explaining this in a way that people understand, and in a way that they understand so well that they actually want to consider buying, and then they buy, right? That's a whole journey to design, and that can, if it depends, if your solution's a bit complicated, that can take years to get right,
So you got to ask yourself, have you built a project, or have you really built a product? And
exactly,
you need to go through that disruptive innovation journey to validate if you've actually got a product opportunity.
Yeah.
Before you try and turn that project into a product and scale it. I see there's another question there that's come in.
Amazing, thank you, Kurt. Sorry, I'm still learning how to drive this thing. All right, let's see what it is. Sarah, you can take this one next. What are your top tips to bootstrap a business pre-investment?
Sure. So with this, the approach to bootstrapping, there's a few things that you can do. So if you are already working on a startup and you have an existing job, for example, and you're working on this as a side hustle, then our advice is to stay in your job to give you that income, so that you can do things like have user research conversations, like do some market segmentation, do the research, and do that kind of during, so that you're mitigating and minimizing your risks before you take the leap to leave a job. If you're already a startup and you're already operating, so you're already a startup founder and you've already doing this full time, and there's a few things that you can do to bootstrap. So one would be around doing some of this market research that we talked about, user research. And sometimes a really great first MVP doesn't look like the product at all. It actually is a service that you can use to start to build out what the product looks like underneath. And so that's a great way of actually making sales as a founder, that can then give you income that you can then use to bootstrap your business. There are other ways that you can bootstrap. Typically some of our founders are working on their startup and they're also doing consulting for a couple of days a week. That's another option. Sometimes there are grants that you can apply for. The challenge with a grant though is that you then typically it's got quite a lot of restrictions, and so if you're trying to meet the grant requirements, it can distract you away from your business. However, it can be a great way to bootstrap. As those just be a couple of examples of how to bootstrap pre-investment.
Yeah, that's really great, and that actually relates really well to the last question that I was gonna bring to us before we jumped off. So this is another question from TikTok. Someone asked, before you quit your job for a startup, how much do you think you need to plan ahead of time?
Yeah, we've shown that disruptive innovation journey, and you'll remember we had kind of stage A, B, and then C. So A being around doing that research, having the vision, looking for competitors, finding the market trends, thinking about technology, thinking about the way that the market's going. We then had the doing that user research, having those conversations, and then getting to that solution concept and testing it with individuals. If you can do that outside of your existing job, so that you have a really strong indicator of market pull, at that point, that and from paying customers, that is the ideal place to then take the leap across to a startup. And then of course there's finding more customers, getting the product out there, iterating, learning from customers, doing testimonials. And again, our disruptive innovation journey provides the entire process for that. I've just given you a few of those steps.
I mean, the key here is that building a startup shouldn't be a giant leap of faith. I think this is the problem that most founders find themselves in, is feeling like there's so much that they're not sure about the process, and that they can't move forward unless they take this giant leap of faith and quit their job and go start their startup or whatever it happens to be. And it's just not the case. You want to take very small incremental steps forward. So if you've got a day job, keep your job and figure out how you can figure out what's a business that's worth building, what's a global market and a global vision opportunity, then figure out what is that first beachhead. Then can you validate that beachhead actually has the problem? And you can do all of that while you're keeping your day job. And you can learn so much about the startup building and the company building process. And the time to quit your job is when you've got so much positive demand from the market and you're just too busy being pulled by the market, because people want to meet with you and they want to talk to you, and they've got this problem and they want to know what solution you're going to come up with. And that pull is when you make the decision to leave your job.
That's right.
If you don't have that pull, if you're trying to push your idea into the world and the world's not responding, don't quit your job.
Great advice. That is really, really good advice. And on that note, we have hit our 1 hour limit. We could talk about this forever, as you know, but for the time being, we will leave it there. As always, if you are a startup founder or an investor that supports startups and you are, concerned about an aspect of your journey, or you're, wanting some help or some guidance about how to go about building your go-to-market strategy, you can book a strategy session with us. At the moment, they are free. So you can just visit the link in my bio or any of our bios, and there will be a link for you to book that strategy session there. And we can actually go through this in your actual context and show you, according to the situations influencing your circumstances, we can show you what's going on and what you'll need to avoid the startup graveyard, and the best, most capital efficient way for you to go about building your idea and taking it out to the world.
Fabulous.
So thanks so much, Kirk. Thanks so much, Sarah, as always, for your time and your incredible expertise. And we will see you all again in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks, yeah.
Pleasure.